Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of ForbesWomen. The second anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, is upon us. And in honor of the occasion, or rather to mark the occasion, women will be going on strike on June 24th. Here to explain what we need to know about this strike and all it hopes to accomplish is the executive director of the Women's March, Rachel O'Leary Carmona. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with this strike. How many women do we expect to strike, and what exactly does the strike entail?
We're not really sure. We're going to find that out together on Monday. The strike began as a grassroots movement on TikTok, actually. And one day, Women's March staff woke up and we found 60, 70 marches planned on our map, which is exactly what our tools are used for everyday feminists to be able to take action on the issues that matter to them. And so it's just been growing ever since. We have a couple of our own rallies that we are planning for the Dobbs anniversary. And so we'll see how many people strike, how many people attend. We know right now there are hundreds planned. There's still a week to go. So we're all going to find out together on Monday, the 24th.
Based on activity you've seen in prior marches, what effect do you hope to make, or what statement do you hope to make on Monday?
The way to really understand marches is that this is the way that many people get involved for the first time. So about 80% of our March attendees and our March planners, and I say March loosely, it could be a rally, it could be a strike, it could be another kind of action. They're new to movement, and not just new to Women's March, but new to movement in general. So what we are seeing is an expansion of the movement, a movement that continues to grow, continues to add people to its ranks. And I think particularly with this grassroots initiative, a demonstration of the ways in which women are furious. And I think that we will continue to see these organic grassroots movements pop up as we get closer and closer to November.
Earlier, I spoke with a sociologist, Jessica Calarco, who talked about the effect of a strike that women in Iceland put on in 1975. And it happened en masse. Men were responsible for caregiving, had schools shut down, some workplaces found themselves inundated with kids. And she says that as a result, it led to more women in government. It led to Iceland's first female president. Could we see the same type of impact here from a strike and demonstration on June 24th? Or is the fact that it's a mix of strikes and demonstrations a sign that it's perhaps more of a message-sending moment than a moment for policy change?
I mean, what you're talking about in Iceland and this strike today are kind of apples and oranges. A general strike is a completely different scale, takes months and months to plan and a lot of resources to help folks who, especially in the United States, might lose their jobs, in right-to-work states or places where it's actually risky. So we have a completely different landscape. We're much bigger, we're much less homogenous. And so the impact of that type of strike would necessitate a multitude of different tactics in the United States and pressure over time. So mobilizations are a part of that, but it also requires organizing, deep relational organizing, lobbying, and inside-outside game. So there's not an easy kind of is this replicable? Well, sure, but we also have to take into account a different time, a different space, a different political climate, different incentives that run for and against organizing and mobilizing in the United States. It's actually not, it's a pretty hostile environment to protest these days. So I think that it's important for us to take all of that into consideration and say that we have to continue to fight in all the ways that are available to us. And the only thing that gets us closer to the win is just keeping that fight up.
You spoke earlier about the anger that women hold, and you have a very unique position in American society as the head of the Women's March. So if you don't mind for us, can you take a look back at the past 2 years? What are the effects that you have seen of the Dobbs decision and the overturning of Roe v. Wade on women?
I mean, I guess I'd back that up and say we can talk about the effects of women on women. Particularly, we've seen a lot about women like Kate Cox or, folks who have been criminalized for their pregnancy and complications that have arisen during it, or the attempts to terminate, and have an abortion. But I want to actually roll back and talk about abortion as a larger tactic, which is to say that the ending of abortion, it's not just because the Republicans hate women. That may be incidental. It may be a part of it, but this is actually an attack on democracy. Most of the groups who are aligned around this goal and who are pushing it are pushing other issues like anti-trans, trying to ban books, and overturning votes. Many of them were associated with January 6 folks, or are perpetuating the lie that the presidency was stolen. And so these are folks who have a goal of undermining democracy itself. The only thing that has actually changed public opinion on abortion in the last 50 years has been Dobbs. And that moved more to people believing that abortion should, be a right that is protected and not fewer. So what is happening is that there are democratically expressed ideas, votes, chosen candidates, et cetera, who are being undermined and stripped away by this same group of people. So we need to understand this is not just an attack on women, but an attack on democracy and an attack on every American. And I think the outcome of that is disgraceful. It's a disgraceful period of our history in our country, but also a very dangerous one. We are slipping towards, autocracy as we see the rise of authoritarians globally in a year where half of the countries on the globe are inside of election years. We see a global rise of authoritarianism, and that's something that is very dangerous and something that we should all be very alarmed about.
It is very alarming. And you just mentioned a lot of crucial issues there. And I do think democracy is the overarching one. But just to dive into some of the other issues that you mentioned anti-trans bills, you mentioned book banning. What are the other political issues that you're hearing from women and the constituents that Women's March serves? Is it more of fair pay, family leave, or is it climate change policy? Is it the conflict in Gaza? Is it all of the above?
I mean, women are a huge block. I mean, we're half the country. We're more than half of the voters. And so different things matter to different people, just depending on where folks are located, So generally speaking, we know that our base is very concerned about safety and security, concerned about political violence. We know that folks are concerned about the weaponization of abortion bans. We know that folks are concerned with abortion care. We know that folks are concerned about what's happening in Gaza. We know that folks are concerned with what's happening with the economy. Many women are heads of households. So I don't think that it's possible to say, like, here are our top three. I think what is actually true is that most women are in the position of having to care about all three. Like, all of the concerns are number one. You can't, really be thinking about when and how to have a family if you don't know how to, you're going to pay rent, or how you're going to afford gas to go to work. And if you are going to have electricity because a storm knocked out your electricity in Houston. All of these things overlap, and they can't be they can't be separated. They can't be disaggregated. And that's why, we really believe that a feminist future is so important, is that we have to understand that all of these pieces are connected, and that in order to bring forward the future that is necessary, we have to have a lens that offers the possible solutions and the political vehicle to get to where we need to be to thrive.
Now, to get to where we need to be to thrive, I do have to ask, we have an election coming up in November. Obviously, the actions on June 24th are related to Dobbs, but what is the Women's March and Women's March Network doing to support President Biden in the November election?
Well, I think, again, what's really important about our election in 2024 is the bigger landscape of so many other elections in 2024. Mexico just had one. Europe just had one. We're having one, and inside of the context of the rise of authoritarianism. And so when we look at the ballot in 2024, whether you're looking at a local ballot, whether you're looking at a state ballot, whether you're looking at the federal ballot, the races, what is on the ballot is freedom or fascism. And that's it. It's just that simple. And so we are fighting towards freedom in all of the different ways that we can. We have a special emphasis on working in the states where there are ballot initiatives regarding abortion, because that's where our base is really fired up and ready to go. And so we're just pushing as many people to what we call knock your block at once. We, focus on getting folks situated to organize the people that they love in their lives. And that is what our main intervention is going to be moving forward into, the election season.
Now, obviously, the Women's March came into prominence in 2017 in the aftermath of the 2016 election. We saw thousands upon thousands of women pouring into the streets around the country. And I know there have been marches since, but for folks who haven't been following the day-to-day news coming out of Women's March Network, what do we need to know about the accomplishments the organization has achieved in the last 7 years?
Well, in the last 7 years, we've organized over 15,000 actions globally, in all 50 globally, but also in all 50 states. We've mobilized over 20 million people. We've been engaged in a number of fights that we pushed and won, including the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, including beating back the so-called sanctuary cities for the unborn initiative, actually in Amarillo, Texas, where I am located. And then we followed the mifepristone case that was just tossed out of the Supreme Court from Amarillo all the way up. So we have picked and won a lot of big battles. Of course, we were at the front lines of both Trump impeachments and one of the driving forces through Women's March, in getting out the vote and getting, flipping the White House back to blue. So, we've been out there working, and like many women, the stories are typically about like the big marches and everything, but the actual work of building a movement is the envelope stuffing and the hauling of t-shirts and boxes and talking to your neighbors and talking to your friends. So much of activist work is very much like women's work, underappreciated, unseen, underpaid, undervalued. And so shout out to all the women inside of the Women's Marches overall network, who are just groups of women who, when the time came for work to be assigned, they just raised their hands. Very new to activism, and the folks who are really growing the movement and making it swell to be able to have the biggest we possible, so that we can win and also defend those wins over time.
It's the day-to-day work. Now, what's interesting about the big movement that you've just described is that women are not a monolith. And I know a number of women's organizations, including Women's March, has in the past struggled with questions about intersectionality or differing views on issues, most notably the conflict in Gaza. How do you navigate those issues internally in your organization?
I mean, I think that our organization was very clear about the conflict in Gaza. As of last year, we had a statement and a petition that tens of thousands of people signed calling for ceasefire. So I actually don't think that those pieces are difficult. I think what is difficult is doing the political work and the organizing work to actually have alignment around a set of politics at first, and that just takes time. Women's March itself, kind of like the strike, was an organic movement that became harnessed into multiple actions and then into an organization, and that there were growing periods associated with that. And I think the way that we navigated that growth from a moment to a movement to an organization is just to really focus on the people that on the base and say, what is it that we're trying to do? What are our political goals? And our political goals have always been very clear, and have gotten clearer and clearer as the stakes have gotten higher and higher. Because one of the things I think a lot of people who don't engage with with politics every day get frustrated, and they say, well, you told me in 2016 that it was the most important election of my lifetime, and then you said the same thing in 2018, and then 2020 and 2022, and now you're saying the same in 2024. And the frustrating truth about that is that it's been true every time. It's not that it hasn't a lie. Each time the election landscape has shifted and become more and more critical, and frankly dire. We're at a place where we really are choosing if we're going to continue to be a democracy in the way that we understand it. And I think that our movement has matured along with that, and gotten a very clear political analysis necessarily along the journey.
I think it's interesting that you talk about democracy being on the ballot, not just in the U.S., but in the world writ large. We've spoken to cybersecurity experts here at Forbes in the past talking about the world's elections. So I have to ask, are there Women's March representatives around the world? Are there international chapters? And if not, is that in the future?
There was at the very beginning a Women's March Global, and I think over time the momentum, I guess the political home for that was in question. I think the the thing that any ongoing movement has to be clear about is who is your base. And I think the question was, is the global base American expats, or is this is there space for a global a women's march that is global? Now, what I will say is that it is not women's march, but one of the groups that is winning very clearly and is an inspiration to me personally is the Green Wave, which is the collection of feminist groups in Latin America who have been winning for abortion rights and fighting femicide, in many different countries, including Mexico and Argentina. And so I think that while there may not be women's march, there are legible feminist movements who are in fact the global leaders in terms of making wins for women. And I think that we have a lot to learn from folks like that.
A lot to learn and a lot coming up. So June 24th, women's marches and strikes, election in November. What are the 1, 2, or 3 things that you're looking ahead to in the coming 6 months that we should have our eye on? Is it certain states with abortion initiatives? Is it the marches and strikes on the 24th? Is it all of the above?
I mean, the first thing that I'd say is that everything that I'm going to look towards is going to be on womensmarch.com. So that's like the first thing. The second thing that I would say is I'm really looking at the states with abortion, abortion related ballot initiatives. And then the third thing that I would say is that we are really looking for the overperformance of women again. And so as we launch all of our initiatives, our Knock Your Block initiative, as we look to a mobilization before the election, a national mobilization before the election, I think we're looking to see, I'm betting on women, and every time I do, I haven't been let down. And so that's where my attention is. That's where my hope is, and that's where I suggest other people go too.
Rachel O'Leary Carmona, Executive Director of Women's March, thank you so much for joining us, and please stay in touch. You have a lot of insights to share.
Thank you for having me.